Alright, we are back again. Another week on Fantasy Football on 5. Last week was our Week 3 wrap-up video. This week will be Week 4.
So if you haven't seen it, please check it below. Okay, so we have a great list of studs this week in fantasy. Start off with Jeremy Hill, Ted Ginn Jr., Devonta Freeman, Cairo Santos, Phillip Rivers, Le'Veon Bell, Chris Ivory, Tavon Austin, Sam Bradford, the Packers defense, DeAndre Hopkins, Vincent Jackson, and Kirk Cousins.
Alright, now Devonta Freeman, he had a really big week this week. He had 3 touchdowns against the Texans, and he had 68 rushing yards along with 81 receiving yards, which is altogether a really good week.
Cairo Santos, the Chiefs kicker, he was 7 for 7 this week. That's almost unheard of. He scored all of their points, so he just reminded us that kickers are people too.
Yes. Alright, a couple of duds this week in fantasy are names like Colin Kaepernick, Joe Flacco, Peyton Manning, Carlos Hyde, Melvin Gordon, DeMarco Murray, Calvin Johnson, Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown, Zach Ertz, Heath Miller, Greg Olsen, and Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham only had 29 yards, and he's only had 2 touchdowns this season. Compared to his previous seasons with the Saints, that's really low. And I predicted him to not do as well going to the Seahawks.
If you want her tight end video, you'll find that out.
Yep.
To follow up with that, Calvin Johnson, he's had a very down year, as we have said in our wide receivers video. The Lions are now the only winless team in the NFL. So, back to this.
0-16.
Okay, so we don't have as long of an injury list as we did last week. So we start off with Tevin Coleman, he's questionable. Steve Smith Sr., he's doubtful for the Ravens. Charles Clay, questionable. LaShawn McCoy and Carlos Williams, questionable. Alshon Jeffries, questionable. Questionable also includes Jay Cutler, Jeremy Hill, Demaryius Thomas, and Eric Ebron.
The Green Bay receivers are all questionable, which include Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams, and
James Jones.
Andrew Luck is out. He is going to be replaced by
Matt Hasselbeck.
Charles Johnson, he's questionable. Brandon Cooks is also questionable. Latavius Murray is questionable. Stevie Johnson is questionable. Vernon Davis is questionable. And Marshawn Lynch is questionable.
Back to McCoy and Carlos Williams. Both are running backs for the Bills. Williams was going to replace McCoy for his hamstring injury, but now Williams is hurt, so they don't have very much depth now. I couldn't tell you who the third-string running back is.
I think it's Boobie Williams, if I remember right.
Boobie Dixon, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I wouldn't recommend a handcuff for any of those running backs right now, so if you have them, bench them.
And also the Green Bay receivers, now that they don't have Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, possibly Devontae Adams, or James Jones.
They're left with Jeff Janis and Ty Montgomery.
Yeah, which I'm sure Aaron Rodgers is still going to light it up without them, but expect some of them to play. Alright, a couple of waiver wire pickups this week in fantasy include names like Antonio Gates, Rashad Jennings, Tavon Austin, Allen Hurns, Martavis Bryant, and Cairo Santos. Now, Allen Hurns had a really big week for the second week in a row. He has had 2 straight weeks with touchdowns. This week he had 116 yards and a touchdown against the Colts, which is pretty good, and he almost led them to a victory.
Tavon Austin for the Rams, he had a big week this week. He had 2 touchdowns and 96 receiving yards. So he established a pretty good connection with Nick Foles. So maybe look for him as a possible waiver wire pickup. Okay, so some pretty notable news in the NFL this week. Antonio Gates and Martavis Bryant are back from their suspensions, so they will both be featured in Monday night's game against the Steelers and Chargers. The Dolphins fired their head coach, Joe Philbin. He was on the hot seat, so they hired Dan Campbell as their interim head coach. It's pretty significant. No NFL players were arrested in this calendar month for the first time since 2009. The Steelers released kicker Josh Scobie, and they signed Chris Boswell from the Giants, which is great because Scobie sucked. He was 6 for 10 on field goals this season, so I'm really glad that they got rid of him. And the Bills signed Billy Cundiff.
Also, a couple of teams on bye this week are the Vikings, the Jets, the Panthers, and the Dolphins. So if you haven't gotten the players on those teams out of your lineups, make sure you do that.
Alright, this is Fantasy Football Advice. We thank you for watching. We deliver all our fantasy news in 5 minutes or less because who would want to watch a 30-minute video on this topic?
Amen.
This is the Week 4 recap. Next week will obviously be Week 5, so stay tuned for that and don't forget to subscribe.
Also, our fantasy team won this week with Jeremy Hill and Derek Carr leading us in scoring, with Jeremy Hill with 24 and Derek Carr with 16. And we are now at 2-2, 500.
Just as good as the Cowboys.